Okay, so this talk is about Jakarta EE. It's about how using Jakarta EE can simplify your life. I'll talk about Jakarta EE, and I'll talk how to get to Jakarta EE. Please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever social media you're using. So Jakarta EE 10. Jakarta EE 10 was released in September last year, so it's fairly new. It is a community-driven, and it's a modernized version of Jakarta EE, and we simplified it a little bit here and there, and also made it a little bit more lightweight. I'll get into all of these kind of stuff in the talk. But the important thing is 10 is the latest version. We're currently working on 11, and it was released last year. Jakarta EE is all about specifications. How many of you are using Spring Framework? So a lot of you. So yeah. Are you aware that you're actually using Jakarta EE then? Because Spring is using a lot of the stuff from Jakarta EE. And Jakarta EE is all about the specifications, where Spring Framework is an implementation of a framework. So it doesn't really implement Jakarta EE, but it uses a lot of technologies that do implement Jakarta EE. And specifications that are, in our world, that is a specification document that describes in textual form what the specification, what the technology is all about. Then there is an API component that is published on Maven Central, and this is what you as application developers would use. You would consume this API and program against it. And then there is a TCK or test compatibility kit, which is a test suite that tests that an implementation fulfills the requirements in the specification. And for an implementation to be compatible, it has to pass this TCK. And in order to ratify a final specification, we need at least one open source compatible implementation. From there on, it's free to go any license you want. It can be a commercial closed source or open source product, but there can be multiple open source and closed source implementations that are compatible with a specification. And Jakarta EE platform has a lot of specification. I think it's about 30 in total. And you're probably familiar with some of these names, and you're probably familiar with some of the names that were used previous to Jakarta EE. Like Jakarta RESTful Web Services used to be called JAX-RS. But now we use the full names of things. We don't do these abbreviations because that's just confusing. Let's just call it what it is. And as you can see here in 10, all the blue ones were updated in Jakarta EE 10. So you see most of them had updates coming in this release. And we are sort of doing semantic versioning here. So the one with a .1 in the version number, they're not breaking anything. They're compatible, and they had minor updates. And those with a .0 after them, the blue boxes, they may have introduced some backwards compatible changes. They usually don't do, and this is why I say we sort of use semantic versioning, because some of these just bumped the version number because they introduced some features they thought it was worth it. But we're discussing whether we should go strict Semver or just do it like this. And there's one orange down in the corner, which is a new specification, or actually not a entire specification on its own. It's a subset of CDI, but we call it CDI Lite, and I'll get to that a little later. The gray ones weren't updated for this release, but they're still there and they're still valid to be used. So if we gray out the more enterprisey flavors of this specification, we're left with the Jakarta EE 10 Web Profile, which is a subset of the platform, and it has specifications that are more suitable for traditional web applications. And it says for creating web UIs, for RESTful endpoints, for web services, for database access, etc., but it doesn't have the kind of the more let's call it legacy technologies communicating to older systems. And then if we take away the webby things, we're left with a set of specifications that we call the Jakarta EE 10 Core Profile. And this is a brand new profile in Jakarta EE 10. The web profile was introduced in Java EE 6, but the core profile is new in 10. And core profile is a set of specifications that you would use to create microservices, headless services, or just like today's modern application, RESTful endpoints. And these are the Jakarta RESTful Web Services specification, the JSON specifications for producing the output, and then some glue specification in the middle, and CDI Lite as well. So let's look at a couple of these, not all of them. And start with security and what was new in Security 3.0. And this is not a breaking thing. They added features and evolved the API. They may have adjusted some method signatures, so technically it's probably a breaking here and there. But it's mostly about adding some features that were requested by the community. And one of those features is OpenID Connect. And you may have used OpenID Connect with Jakarta EE before, but then you've probably used it in a more proprietary way, depending on which provider or which implementation you're using. But now it's portable across implementations. It's standardized way of using OpenID Connect with Jakarta EE. And the security specification is actually 3 specifications. It's the security API that US application developers would use. And then we have Jakarta Authentication and Jakarta Authorization, which is sort of lower level SPIs used for the implementers that we as application developers don't really need to care so much about. It's a foundation for future work. That's what they did with these specifications in this release. The OpenID Connect authentication mechanism has this very brief and nice annotation called @OpenID authentication mechanism definition. So try to say that. That's a word that counts, right? And this is an annotation you put in the code, and these are some of the configurations you can use. There are more of them, so it has a wide range, so you can configure anything you need in order to configure OpenID Connect in application, portable across implementation, and do it as an application developer. You don't need anybody else to do the configuration for you. You can do it yourself. Jakarta Persistence had a minor update. It's also adding features and evolving the API. And one of the kind of community wanted was to add UIDs as a basic Java type. So now you can actually use UIDs and generate them using the generation strategy UID, and you don't have to map between strings and UIDs from the database back and forth in your code, so you can just have the framework do it for you. So, RESTful Web Services. They also updated the API with stuff that the community had wanted. They first announced a Jakarta RESTful Web Services 4.0, which would break compatibility because they wanted to go all CDI and remove some of the annotations and component models they are using today. But they decided on maintaining compatibility for this release. And one thing they added was support for multi-part form data. So now you can upload, download files in a standard way. You may have done this with RESTeasy or Jersey in a proprietary way before, but now you can use it in a standard way and move between implementations. And they also added a cool new feature, the Java SE Bootstrap API. So now you can actually just bootstrap the application without running in an application server. You just have a main method to run it. And I'm actually going to demo this. And what I'm going to do is to take Jakarta RESTful Web Services. I'm going to use I think it's an alpha or beta of RESTeasy. It's final now, but I haven't updated my dependencies. And I'm just going to hardcode a greeting using JSON binding and Jakarta REST. So let's look how you can do this with the Java SE Bootstrap API. So this application is called Bootyduk, and you can see it's packaged as a jar. So that's kind of the first clue that this is not a traditional Jakarta application, which would usually be a WAR. And I'm using the Shade plugin here. You can use maybe dependency or whatever packaging new stuff you want to do. And I have the Jakarta RESTful Web Services 3.1 dependency. And since I'm not running in an application server, I actually have to add, this could actually have been provided for me, but I just package it here. And then I have REST-easy, the core, the web server, and the JSON binding, just to have something to run it with. So because as soon as you don't deploy it into an application server, you need to provide the runtime. Like you do in Spring Framework, you add the Spring Boot starter stuff, and it drags in Tomcat or whatever. And this is the same. I just drag in undertow here. And the code is so simple. It's just the @hello path is a get requests, and it just turns JSON and is a hard-coded string. So it's nothing really fancy about it. It's just to show that it works. And the configuration for a RESTful Web Services is this: you extend the Jakarta RESTful application. And this is where the interesting part comes in, because I said I can just run it with the main method. So I'll add a main method here in this class. I could do it in a different class, but it makes sense to have it in the application class, but it can be anywhere. Just the main method you package in your jar. And what I'm going to do here is three things. First, I'm going to define the application, and that is just instantiate this application. So I instantiate myself there. So that's very simple. Then I'm going to do some configuration. And I can do a lot of configuration here, but I'm doing the simple stuff. I'm just setting the port to 8081 and setting a root path. And I can do more. But I'll just do this stuff there. And then the third thing I'm going to do is to start the application. And that is simply to call the start method on SE Bootstrap and pass in the application and the configuration. And just wait until somebody presses Control C here. Let's just add an exception to the method. And that's it. So now I can actually run this application from command line. So I'll just compile it first. Package. And when it's compiled, I can target. So you can see it's created a booty root jar for me. And if I run this with Java jar booty root jar, it will start up, and you see it's fairly quick. And I can navigate to this application, and it was the hello endpoint. I'll zoom in here. So you see it's booty root hello. And you can see it returns a string. So this is, it's not a very fancy example, but this is how you can use the SE Bootstrap very simply with Jakarta EE. Okay, so I'll just have to go back to this. Okay. For some reason, it's not displaying correctly. Oh, it's a zoom, yeah, sorry. Zoom out. There we go. Thank you. So that was the RESTful Web Services on its own, but let's look at the core profile as a whole. And Jakarta EE Core Profile, the goal of this specification was to target smaller runtimes, and we want to have a small set of specifications, so the runtimes didn't necessarily have to implement all the other specifications when you just want this. And currently, the core profile compatible applications are Open Liberty, Payara, and Wi-Fi, which is not the typical small runtimes you would expect. I mean, they can be small if you just configure the core profile, but it wasn't really what we were after. But these are also compatible, because if you are compatible with the web profile or the platform, you're also compatible with the core profile, as long as you bother to run the TCK, and these have done that. The runtimes we were thinking of when we were creating core profile is runtimes like Halidon or Quarkus or Micronaut or that kind of stuff. They haven't got there yet. I think Halidon is on the path to passing the TCK and will probably be the first kind of the runtimes we were targeting for Jakarta EE Core Profile. And just wait out for the announcements, and that will probably be fairly quickly, I think. I think they're almost there. And the key technology for both these technologies and also for the core profile is the CDI Lite 4.0. Because you probably know that CDI is very dynamic of nature. And it kind of does a lot of things on startup. So that's why we created CDI Lite, which is designed to be in more restricted environments. And with more restricted environment, we mean to be able to do the dynamic stuff at build time. And when we can do all the dynamic stuff at build time, that opens up for continuing and also compile to native using GraalVM. So you can use this to create Jakarta EE native images if that's what you're aiming for. You don't have to. You can still run it in the JVM, but it kind of opens up for the possibility. And in order to do this, we needed to remove the dynamic portable extensions and replace it with a new extensions API, which is reflection-free and is a more modern way of creating portable extensions, but that will be resolved at build time. A kind of disputed decision they made as well was to change the behavior of Beans XML. So if you're migrating from previous version of Jakarta EE up and up, this is the big breaking change in 10. So this is gonna annoy you, but I'll show how to do it. It's not that hard. And they also removed some deprecated stuff that has been hanging on for a long time. Let's move on to the demo part. And how many of you are, I mean, most of you are using Spring, but how many of you are using Java EE or Jakarta EE or have been? Not that many, okay, couple. So what I'm going to do now will actually apply to you as Spring developers as well. Because I have another talk that I'm not doing here this year, but I may come back next year and do it, which is about how to cope with the namespace change for Spring Boot applications. And how to do it with your third-party dependencies, which may be on the old JavaX namespace. So doing the JavaX to Jakarta namespace transition is something that you will discover when you move from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3. Or if you move from Spring Framework 5 to Spring Framework 6, which is on the Jakarta namespace. And this is where the kind of the dependencies to Jakarta comes in. You will see it in your code. And of course, it's all about this namespace change that we did between 8 and 9. And for Spring developers, you're probably packaging Jetty or Tomcat in your Spring Boot applications, which is dragged in by default. And both Jetty and Tomcat, the latest versions, are on Jakarta namespace. So if you want to run on latest versions of these, it's the namespace change. And that's what's done in Spring Boot 3 for you, or Spring Framework 6. Also, you're probably using Hibernate for persistence, or Hibernate Validator for validation, which are also on the Jakarta namespace. And you'll see in your code when you migrate from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3 that your JavaX namespace stuff doesn't compile any longer, and you have to change the namespace. So this is why this applies to you as well. And one way you can do it, and especially if you have third-party libraries, is to, well, screw the code. I'll just do the bytecode. So you can use the Eclipse Transformer or the Apache Tomcat migration tool or some other tool out there. I'm sure there are other tools, but these are open source available for you, and they will transfer the bytecode for you. So if you have a library that is using the JavaX namespace, you can just run the Eclipse Transformer on it and produce a jar that's on the Jakarta namespace, and you can use that as the the IDE will help you, and I'll show how to do that. IntelliJ has some package refactoring stuff for you. And you may do it manually. And most of these steps actually apply to Spring applications as well. And there are actually a couple of other steps that would do to Spring applications. But at least the first couple of them apply, or actually the four first and the sixth will apply to Spring applications. If you're using them, it may or may not. So just think, if you're not familiar with the Jakarta APIs, just think your Spring application, and you may have some of the stuff in your code. The application I'm using, how many architects? Okay, but you have architects on your project, right? Some of you, yeah. So, but you probably have met an architect sometime, and an architect, when an architect creates a hello world, it's just not a one-liner Python hello world. We need a database, and we need a persistent layer, and we need some transaction support. We need security. and we need some CDI extensions to impress the sysadmins, and we need a JSON output and a REST endpoint. So this is the simplest Hello World application in the world created by an architect. And I'm going to go through all of these steps. You can find also a tutorial here on the Jakarta EE Bootstrap on my GitHub. I'll show the link later. And the next step after that is that I'll go from 9 and further. But let's go here. The first step is to update the POM file. Let's get this done. So my complete Duke application here. First, I'll just show that it's actually running. So I'm first going to deploy it. So I have it here. I'm running it on Glassfish 5, and you can see in the log it prints a nice message, which means the CDI extension works. And if I go to my Glassfish, which is running on this port, I'll zoom in and try to zoom out afterwards. So I can go to the complete Duke hello application, and it will say hello Jakarta EE. So the application works. So the application is using Java 8. How many are using Java 8? Okay. Yeah. Anything higher than 20? 17? 11? Yeah. So I'll take you all the way from 8, 11, and 17. So we could go 20 as well, but there's nothing really fun for me between 17 and 20. So yeah. So let's. But we're starting with 8. And since this is a Jakarta EE traditional application, I'm using Jakarta EE 8 and in the provider scope. So you see my dependencies are very clean. Try to imagine this in your Spring application with one dependency, and it's provided. So that's the benefit of Jakarta EE. The application is sort of similar to the one, the Booty Duke. I have the application configuration. I have my greeting entity that I'm reading from the database, which has the message and an email field, and getters and setters to that. I have a repository class that reads this from the database, which are using the criteria language. So I'm using the CQ select from. If I had used Jakarta 11, maybe I could have used Jakarta data, which would be like Spring data, and then I can replace this method with that. Then I have a enterprise Java bean, which is, you can see it's an EJB by looking at the stateless annotations. That's all there is about it. And then I had transactions and everything for me. And I'm just injecting the repository and finding the greeting. And my business logic here is simply to find the first one. If there isn't the first one, I'll just hard code it. And then I have the hello world, the hello endpoint, which is using the EJB to find the greeting and then return it as JSON. So this is all there is about the application. The message I showed you in the log is this @Dukes annotation that is picked up by this portable CDI annotation that is just looking for the Dukes annotation and then prints the message. So this is just for kind of to impress the sysadmin. So the first thing I'm going to do is to upgrade the Jakarta EE version, and I'm going to upgrade it, take it step by step. This is the recommended step is to take it from 8 to 9 first, because we didn't change APIs between 8 and 9. So if something goes wrong, it's just the namespace. There are no API changes. In 10, there are some API changes, so you may discover something. So I've upgraded it here from 9 to 10, and I've refreshed the POM file, and you can see I know I have a lot of compilation error because it can't find the JavaX imports anymore. And this is what you will experience in the Spring applications as well. So what you can do if you're using IntelliJ is to use the migrate packages Java EE to Jakarta EE, and this applies to Spring projects as well. And just choose the module you're doing, run the refactoring, I'll just do it there, and you see it changes everything to Jakarta for me. So you don't have to do this manually. You don't have to write a script to do it. You can just use the ID. So that is the two first steps. I've updated the POM and fixed the imports. So the next thing I'm going to do is the schema namespaces, and this may or not apply to you. But in my file, in my application, I'm using Jakarta Persistence, and in Jakarta Persistence we have something called the Persistence XML, and the Persistence XML is using the namespace that has been along for the entire time, which is the jcp.org namespace. And with Jakarta E9, we changed this to Jakarta. So we changed two things. We made it to HTTPS, and then we called it simply Jakarta EE /XML. So this is, and this you can find this in the specifications, and we have a web page. You can go to jakarta.ee/xml, and you'll find or /schemas, and you'll find all these schemas there and how they look like today. So I just have to do this all align, and also the location of the actual schema. There probably is some automation support here and there for this as well. Standard in Java EE and Jakarta EE is that the file name for the actual schema includes the version number. And for this one, it's persistence 3.0. And now we can see the validation kicks in and says you have to update the version number in your file. So this is kind of making sure that I'm doing it correctly. And in my file, I don't have any other XML file. If you have a web XML or beans XML or something, you would have to do this namespace switch in the schemas there as well. But you can see it's very simple. It's just that's a simple search and replace in the XML schema definitions. Then I have the step 4, the properties. And I only have a couple of properties in my file, and in this persistence XML, I have the JavaX persistence schema generation, which I'm used to generate the test data in my database. So I have this JavaX persistence, and these have to be changed to Jakarta. So it's very consistent. But here is the place where you have to be a little careful, because if you're referencing something that hasn't changed, something that is part of the JDK, for example, with some properties, you should stick with JavaX because that's still a valid namespace. It's only the Jakarta specifications that change. So if you have more of these, you got to change them here and there. The next step is to rename bootstrapping files. And this is probably not that relevant for Spring applications, but for this application, I have one bootstrapping file, which is called the JavaX Enterprise Inject SPI extension. And it defines the CDI extension I'm using in my application. And you probably can guess what I have to do here. It's to simply rename this file from JavaX to Jakarta. So it is the same rename everywhere, but this is the file name I have to rename. So now I've done everything in my code. So the next thing I'm going to do is to run this in a Jakarta E9 application server. So I'm going to start Jakarta Glassfish 6. I'll just kill the Glassfish 5 for now, and then in Glassfish 6, I'm going to add the complete Duke application. Let's just add it. There you go. So you can see I have it here, and I'll just deploy it. And you can see it deploys nicely and prints the message. So and also let's also check it here that we have the correct application, and it's now on port 8080, and it's hello. No, wait a second. Let's see. Is it running on 8080 or is it still on 8082? Yeah. So it runs on here and said, but you can notice it said hello to Jakarta E8. And that's where kind of the clue comes in, that the last step I had was, you may have some dynamic stuff. In this case, it's just a message saying howdy Jakarta EE8, but it could have been something creating concatenating a file, fully qualified class name, or a property with Java X or something. So if you do dynamic building of properties or reflection stuff in your application, this is may be somewhere that you have to fix the dynamic data. And in my case, I can just fix this by writing howdy Jakarta EE9 and commit this, and my application should do what I expect it to do. So, but we can do more. I told you about doing the Java updates. So let's upgrade that. But I want to be a little bit more bold. I'll go directly from 8 to 17, and upgrade this. And then let's also use some features that came in 17, or actually in 16. But let's imagine it was in 17. And one of the cool features there is records. Anybody using records, or not if you're on 11, but this is a reason why you should upgrade. So I'll create a class. I'll call it a record. I call it Dux reading record, and I'm going to give it a message and a date. And this is how you define a record, and it will generate getters and setters for me. So this is my because there is a big flaw in my design, and that is I'm using the database entity and I'm exposing it through my REST endpoint, which is not a good strategy. So I'm using the record in between here as a data object or a DTO. So what I'm going to do is, when I retrieve it from the database, I'll map it to a record and then submit it up. And this is where something I would do in to return rather than returning a Dux greeting, I'm going to return a Dux greeting record. And then I need to fix the service to also return a record. And here, when I've done the database call and found the first one, I'll simply map it to take the greeting I found from the database and map it to a new Dux greeting record, and take the greeting get message, and I'm going to just use local date now. And if I don't find anything in the database, I'll hardcode the record, just say hi, and rather than undefined, I'll also here use local date now. So now you can see what I've done is just use a record through the REST endpoints. So what I'm going to do is run it, but before I run it, I just want to, I'll comment this generate test data thing out, so I don't write Jakarta EE8 again in the database. So I'll just comment this out, and then I'll run it. So who thinks this will work? So it says hello, so currently the application is up and running. How is this going to work? Will it be able to do the record stuff in the... Anybody? Yeah. Let's see, I press refresh, and it returns an empty JSON. Why is that so? Well, Jakarta EE9 actually only supports Java 11, but I'm running it and using 17. It runs fine, everything works fine, but the JSON binding won't take a record and create the JSON for me. How can I fix that? Well, I happen to know that JSON binding is relying on the Java beans pattern. And you know Java beans, it has getters and setters. That means a method called get, a attribute, and set. And how does a record look? So if I look at the greeting record, you can see I have a method called date and message. It's not get date and get message. So JSONB won't be able to pick it up, but I can fix this. So the easy, super hacky way of fixing this is simply to call this method get message and get date. And if I now look at this service here, you can see the method is now called get date and get message. So this should work, right? It's not a nice thing to do, but you can do it. So this is probably one of the words that you shouldn't listen to, right? But it works. So we're happy. I said data message. So let's move on. Because it doesn't stop there. Let's go from 9 to 10 as well when we're ahead of ourselves. And it's actually fairly easy to go from 9 to 10 because there are no namespace changes. So what I'm going to do here is to simply take this one, find the 9 version here, and go 10. Reload the POM, and then I'll deploy it directly into GlassFish 7. Just start it. And GlassFish 7 implements Jakarta EE 10. So I'm going to pick the artifact here, add it. There you go. And then I'm going to deploy it and see whether it works fine. And it says a lot of crap there. And so obviously it won't work. And why is this so? Well, if you remember back that I said CDI is not backwards compatible, you need to have a beans XML file in your code now. And empty beans XML doesn't mean the same as empty beans XML before. Another thing is that previously a non-existent beans XML meant the same as an empty beans XML. So what I need is actually a beans XML file. And this is not that obvious, especially from the stack trace. But if you know about that, this was the only real breaking thing between the versions, then you probably know about it. So I'm just going to take the beans XML file here, add it, and you can see IntelliJ supports Jakarta EE 10 because the namespace has already been updated to the latest version. And it's empty, because empty beans XML now means annotated, and everything in my code is annotated, so I'm good. So that's all I need to make this work in Jakarta EE 10. I'll just redeploy it. And you can see now in the log, it displays the message. I can go to, and now I'm fairly sure it runs on 8080. Complete tick, hello. And there you go. But now you can notice it says get date and get message. Because in Jakarta EE 10 we support 17. So that means that JSONB actually renders this as it's supposed to do. So we can get rid of this ugly hack we did in the previous version. And just call the record what it's supposed to be. And if I redeploy this one, it will display. But we made this as Jakarta EE 9, but that's just update the database. So you see, the upgrade from 9 to 10 is not that hard. So if we look at the core profile, the application I'm having here, there are a couple of things that isn't included in core profile. If you remember the couple of specifications. One is I don't have persistence layer, so I cannot use the database stuff. And also the CDI extension is not a portable extension any longer. It's a the new extensions API, which is called build compatible extension. And I'm just going to show this in code. I'm not going to run anything. Or I could run it, but I won't code anything. So here you can see I have a core API. So I'm only using the core profile API. And I have the same application. It's a simple greeting saying say hello, but the service here is not an EJB anymore because EJBs aren't in core profile. I'm just using a request scope CDI bean. It could be application scope or something else, but this is appropriate for me. And it's just saying howdy core. I'm using the greeting record. The extension is what is different. And if you remember the extensions from the old way of doing it, is that I'm implementing CDI extension, and I have these methods I override where I observe different things. In the new extensions API, this is done a little bit differently. First of all, I don't extend the extension, I extend the build compatible extension API. And there are no methods to override, but I can add annotations for different life cycles of CDI. And this is, here I use the enhancement phase. There are discovery and other 5 different phases you can use, which is whatever is appropriate. And I'm just looking for the Duke's annotation. I'm doing the same thing. So the code is very similar, but I'm using a completely different annotation-based API. The other thing different is, if you remember the file called Jakarta Enterprise Inject SPI extension, where I had the fully qualified class path for this extension. In the build compatible, this file is called Jakarta Enterprise Inject Build Compatible SPI Build Compatible extension. Luckily, you don't have to remember this file name because it is the same as the package of the interface. So that's the file name you're using, and that's actually the same for the other CDI extensions as well. So, what comes beyond Jakarta E10? Then we're talking Jakarta E11, and Jakarta E11 actually has started now. We're in the process of creating, defining what the scope is going to be, and creating a release plan. So I'm pretty sure we will be announcing some preliminary dates fairly quickly. What we're trying to enforce now is a release cadence based on the Java LTS versions. So when a Java LTS version comes out, we want to release a Jakarta version 6 months after. And later this year, Java 21 comes out, which is an LTS. And 6 months after that is around Q1, beginning of Q2 2024. And that's when we want to release Jakarta E11. We're targeting around 6 months after the Java LTS. So we're trying to establish this kind of release cadence model. And that means it will be released about every second year, as long as the release cadence for LTS releases are 2 years. So it's 17, 21, and then next will be 28 or something. And we will base the API levels on 17 or 21, or some of the APIs may actually stick on 11. We don't really care if they don't update anything. They can use 11. But if some APIs want to use 21, for example, the concurrencies APIs will probably do something around virtual threads. So adding support for Project Loom is something that the concurrency people are looking at. Otherwise, that would probably just be most an implementation thing. But that means that those APIs will go on 21. And if we have some APIs that depend on them, they will also have to raise to 21. Or they can, others can stay to 17. They can do multi-release jars or something. But we are recommending, if you do changes, you go to 21. And what we are definitely going to make sure is that the TCK runs on 21, so that runtimes and US application developers can use 21. So that's something to look forward to if you're on 11 today. Jakarta config is a new specification that we hope to make into 11. They are working on it. And that is to standardize portable configuration and being environment aware. That means that you can take your application and deploy it on your laptop, and it will use some set of settings. Maybe you have a local database or some development stuff. And if you drop it in a Kubernetes cluster in your staging environment, it will pick up the properties from there and be configured to that environment. Or if you run it in production, so you don't have to recompile or rebuild or do anything, it will just use the environment properties available for it. And in the application, you will have a programmatic API, but also annotation-based. So you can do something like this, add config property and name of the property, and you can just inject whatever you're using, and it will pick it up from the environment. Jakarta MVC is a standard of the action-based model view control pattern. It's not that relevant, maybe if you're doing microservices, but if you're doing server-side rendered applications, which is something that sooner or later will come back. We're always going in circles in this industry. So when, and I'm saying when, server-side rendering is back, Jakarta MVC is actually a pretty neat and cool technology building on top of Jakarta REST. So it's very little you have to learn in order to do it. You just add the @controller annotation and an @view annotation, and then you're good to go. In this case, it's just it's using CDI as a model, and you can use a list if you want, but CDI is appropriate for this. And we support, in this case, a JSP, but we support a wide variety of rendering engines. Jakarta NoSQL is a new specification, standardized NoSQL databases, the same as JPA does today. So if you're using Hibernate for your relational databases, Hibernate implements Jakarta persistence. Probably some of these or mapping frameworks will implement Jakarta NoSQL if it makes it to the specification, and you can do it the same way for NoSQL. We standardized gRPC with Jakarta RPC. It's also not really gotten a good start yet, so I doubt it will make it to 11, but it's there, and it could if it gets some attention. And also, as I mentioned, we have the new Jakarta data specification, which will standardize the repository pattern that you probably know from Spring Data, that you just define an interface and it generates the data access for you. And this is something we will hopefully get into Jakarta 11 as well. This is kind of my thing to just, this is one of the things you shouldn't listen to as well. Jakarta functions, why not standardize something around cloud functions? It wouldn't be probably not be a part of the platform or anything, but have some standard ways so you don't have to write your functions differently if you write them on AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or something else. So you can have a standard way of creating your function. Wouldn't that be great? So to sum up, Jakarta EE 9 brought us the namespace change, and that's kind of what's disrupting the industry today. And Spring Framework picked it up when they released Spring 6 and Spring Boot 3. So that's kind of all around us now. Jakarta EE 10 brought a lot of new stuff in the specifications that is kind of have been lingering around, and the community has waiting to get it in, and now they finally got it. And also the new Jakarta EE 10 Core Profile is kind of building for the future and making Jakarta EE possibly a very lean and small, minimal application platform for combining to native if you want. In Jakarta EE 10, we have the base level of 11. But we have the TZK run on 11 and 17. And I'm pretty sure there will be Jakarta EE 10 implementations running on Java 21 as well. But that's something we're aiming for 11. If you want to know more about Jakarta EE, you can go to https://jakarta.ee, and from there you can sort of figure out where to go. /specifications will take you to all the specifications. We have a blog aggregator, so if you're writing a blog and want to get published, it doesn't have to be about Jakarta EE, it can be about Spring or something else. It's very easy to get listed there. So if you write a blog and want to get some publicity around it, you can get aggregated here. Just go to Jakarta blogs and see how to be a blogger. And you just feed your blog in. Now I do that with my blog. It's just the RSS feed from my blog. And my blog is called java.eu. And I'm writing a weekly #Jakarta EE, as well as I write some write-ups from the conferences I've been to and some what's happening in the Jakarta community. The demo code from this talk is on my GitHub. It's called Jakarta EE Duke. And I'm pretty sure if you Google or Bing Jakarta EE Duke, you will get here. There's not that many other applications called Jakarta EE Duke. We are running a developer survey. And this is something we're especially asking Spring developers to participate. So this is where you take up your mobile phones and scan this QR code. And whenever you're ready, take 5 minutes and answer some questions. With that, I thank you very much for listening to me.